Welcome to Posterity Podcast, a discussion of unusual subjects that touch the lives of everyday people from a Christian worldview. This is Mike Carmen sitting alongside Jay Carmen, otherwise known as the Overlords of the UFO, coming to you from cul-de-sacs in two mysteriously undisclosed locations in Ohio and Tennessee via the internet. Well, it has been a little while, Jay. How have you been?
I'm good. It has been a while, and it's been a very warm while. It's hot here in my mysteriously undisclosed location in Ohio. Earlier today, it was close to 100 degrees.
Undisclosed, sweaty location.
That's right. Very warm.
Really? It was upwards to 100 degrees in southern Ohio?
Actually, it was in the low 90s, but it felt much hotter. So yeah, it was uncomfortable. Yesterday was also uncomfortable.
Wow.
I have not tried to cut the grass. I am not into a heat stroke. I have seen a few people in my neighborhood cutting grass. I think they're probably at the hospital now. But no, it's been really warm. So I've endeavored to stay, I've been out a lot, but I've endeavored to stay indoors, especially in the heat of the day.
Yeah, well, that's a good idea. My grass could stand to be cut maybe tomorrow, but it really hasn't been as hot down here in Middle Tennessee, I think, as it has been where you're at. We actually went to my mother-in-law's farm up in Kentucky yesterday, and I weed eated quite a bit and cut some grass and probably spent about 4 hours outside and was pretty tired when I got done, but it wasn't nearly as hot as it has been in the past, especially in the months of June and July when I've done that. So thankful for a little bit of overcast weather yesterday.
We have not seen too much overcast. We saw, not the last couple of days anyway, we saw some rain off and on during the week, a little bit every day actually, but the last 2 days have been dry, hot, the kind of weather that when your grass grows, the dry, weedy stuff shoots way up because it doesn't need much water.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what will lead me to cut the grass.
Yeah.
The unsightly things.
Well, what is this podcast episode's subject all about, Jay?
Today we are talking about the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, that office's report on unidentified aerial phenomena that came out in June of this year. And as part of that, we'll talk about what prompted the release of the report, maybe some of the things that prompted the prompting of the release of the report.
Right.
As you and I have talked earlier, maybe you could start with that, about some of the things that have come out over the last few years. And then I'll explain a little bit about the report itself. It's only 9 pages long, counting the cover page. It is a preliminary assessment. It was released to June 25th of this year, and under law, it had to be released in June of this year. It is preliminary. It's unclassified. It's brief, and it has some interesting things to say, and it has some interesting things that it doesn't say. So
right now, I think for our listeners, everybody knows that we're quite a bit behind the 8 ball on this. This came out 2 months ago, and most everyone has read it that was going to read it, and those that were going to talk about it have talked about it, but we're just now getting around to it. But this is a preliminary assessment on unidentified aerial phenomena. Will there be an assessment report, a complete assessment report to follow this in the near future, or is that going to be in the distant future?
The report ends simply by saying that data will continue to be collected and analyzed. It talks about appropriating funds to develop ways to do that, creating methods for gathering information and intelligence from other sources. It does not really allude to any further public report.
Okay.
So,
So we're not waiting for something else to come out this year or next year.
not from this, no.
Okay. Well, this podcast episode is a part of a series of episodes that we are attempting to do just on the subject of UFOs. And in the near future, we're going to get to Richard Dolan's book, UFOs in the National Security State, and some other works by Dr. Jacques Vallée, even um, some works by Dr. J. Allen Hynek on the history of ufology. We'll eventually wrap that up with our best understanding of this phenomenon from a Christian worldview, especially in terms of the gospel message and people who claim to be harassed, abducted, so forth by UFOs. But concerning the history of this subject, we do have this little report called Project Blue Book. Actually, it's not a big report, it's a big, hefty report. But in the history of this subject, prior to this preliminary assessment on UAPs, there was a study done by the United States Air Force called Project Blue Book. Project Blue Book, I'm just going to read some notes off the Wikipedia page. It was a code name for the systematic study of UFOs by the U.S. Air Force from March of 1952 until December of 1969. The project was headquartered at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It was originally directed by Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, and its scientific advisor over its 20 years, less than 20 years, was a man by the name of Dr. J. Allen Hynek. There are three conclusions that we want to begin with before talking about the preliminary assessment of the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Report, which was issued from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. The conclusions of Project Blue Book were formulated by a group called the Condon Report, which was basically given all of Project Blue Book's reports with the authorization to study them and come up with a conclusion. So the Air Force supplied the following summary of its overall investigation. Number one was no UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the Air Force was ever an indication of threat to our national security. Number two, there was no evidence submitted to or discovered by the Air Force that sightings categorized as unidentified represented technological developments or principles beyond the range of modern scientific knowledge. And number three, there was no evidence indicating that sightings categorized as unidentified or extraterrestrial vehicles. So we want to give those three conclusions before we begin this discussion and use them as kind of a springboard to see if anything has changed since Project Blue Book closed and gave its final report in 1969.
Okay, I want to ask something about that. Doesn't it say at the end of the Condon report, which was, of course, derived from Blue Book's studies, don't they say then that they recommend that there's no need? If I remember correctly, didn't they say there was no need to gather further information or to continue, allocate resources, continue the study, something to that effect?
I do believe that is correct. I did not specifically go and look for that conclusion. Let me see what I can dig up here while we're online. In November 1970, the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics generally agreed with Condon's suggestion that little value had been uncovered by scientific UFO studies, but did not find a basis in the report for Condon's prediction that nothing of scientific value will come from further studies. So, yes, you are right. Condon did predict that nothing of scientific value would come from the further study of unidentified flying objects. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, however, wrote that the Condon report settled nothing. He called Condon's introduction singularly slanted and wrote that it avoided mentioning that there was embedded within the bowels of the report a remaining mystery, and that was that the committee had been unable to furnish adequate explanations for more than one quarter of the cases examined. Hynek contended that Condon did not understand the nature and scope of the problem he was studying and objected to the idea that only extraterrestrial life could explain UFO activity. By focusing upon this hypothesis, he wrote, the report did not try to establish whether UFOs really constituted a problem for the scientist, whether physical or social. So there was much more to Condon's conclusions than what his conclusions actually revealed, if that makes sense. There was much more to the Condon report than what we were left to believe. And that came from Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who is the scientific advisor to Project Blue Book. He wrote the book, The Hynek UFO Report, which I listened to on audio over the summer. And there is a wonderful chapter in that book called It Can't Be, Therefore It Isn't, in which he goes through case after case after case, which could not rationally be explained away as astronomical phenomena. What were some of the other things that Project Blue Book concluded? Hoaxes, misinterpretations. And so it was very much a slap back in the face of modern science at the time for basically just rationalizing away the reports that Project Blue Book generated. Very good book.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that he acknowledges the fact that science, military, other belief systems automatically rejected the idea of extraterrestrial involvement, which we kind of deal with that from a spiritual perspective, but they automatically rejected that. And so anything that could not be explained was also not possibly extraterrestrial. Therefore, it just isn't. It was almost like taking it was very dismissive. The best way to put it is perhaps that it's just simply dismissive. We don't know what you saw. We don't believe that what you saw was extraterrestrial. Perhaps you saw nothing at all.
Correct.
Something to that effect.
It can't be, therefore it isn't.
Right.
Well, would you like to begin the UAP report?
Yes, and perhaps we should preface this with just the acknowledgement that what led to the creation of the report, the release of this preliminary assessment, had a lot to do with the Navy videos, the Tic Tac videos, things like that
Correct.
that appeared on YouTube. And as a result of those being made public, then some major publications and writers getting involved and forcing, probably not really forcing, but creating an environment in which people wanted to know more. And that brought to a head the need for some kind of public report. Go ahead.
If you don't mind, I'll jump back in and say that it did not all end with the closure of Project Blue Book. As you're indicating, there was interest in the subject prior to this preliminary assessment of unidentified aerial phenomena, and that was the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or ATIP. And of course, you can find this on Wikipedia and many places on the internet. But this, I think, stirred the waters the decade prior to what we're seeing now, as this program was an unclassified and unpublicized investigation funded by the U.S. government to study UFOs or UAPs. It was made public in December of 2017. The program, however, began in 2007 with funding of about $22 million over the 5 years until the available appropriations were ended in 2012. The program began in the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency. This, of course, was initiated by the former Senator Harry Reid, of which Robert Bigelow and Bigelow Aerospace had something to do with, as they were in part recipients of some of this funding to participate in the study I can't remember if the Skinwalker Ranch was involved in this ATIP study or not. Do you recall that?
No, I don't remember. And was ATIP, you said it was unclassified. Was it classified or was it unclassified?
It says here on Wikipedia, the ATIP program was an unclassified but unpublicized investigation.
Okay, that would make sense.
We did not know that it existed until 2017, which was 5 years after the program ended. It ran from 2007 to 2012. This is, of course, the program that Luis Elizondo, who was the former director, has gained national attention as he is now a part of the Stars Academy, that is a private organization, and he has also been a part of the History Channel special, which has highlighted the Tic Tac videos and other videos, the United States Navy aircraft carriers and pilots who saw vehicles and so forth. So for decades, while we thought the United States government was out of the business of studying unidentified flying objects, lo and behold, that was not true. From 2007 to 2012, they certainly were involved.
Well, and that's kind of where some of these things, the videos, the national publicity that those videos, not just national, but international publicity that those videos generated, the naming of individuals associated with organizations, all of this kind of brings things to a head. And so let's pick up maybe with just talking about what this report that came out in June of 2025 actually is. June 25th, not 2025, June 25th of
I was wondering
2021.
if you actually said 2025.
I did say 2025. It's coming.
That's
It's
right.
coming. It's not here, but it's coming.
There's another report coming in 2025.
That's right.
No, not really.
Not really. No. June 25th, 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released this preliminary assessment on unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs. This is formally what we've called for years now UFOs, unidentified flying objects. And because UFOs has this stigma associated with it, I saw a UFO. Yeah, right. Because there's a stigma there, the accepted term is UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena.
That makes it easier to stomach, doesn't it?
It does, yes. Yeah. I saw something up. Well, never mind.
Yeah.
So this preliminary assessment, how did it come to be? Let's start with this. Under public law, and if I've got my research right here, Section 364, Public Law 111-259 states that the Director of National Intelligence, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, has to disclose a proposed annual budget for national intelligence programs. And it's a kind of an all-encompassing budget. The 2021 budget, which is really what this assessment is coming as a result of, the 2021 budget was publicly disclosed February 11th of 2020. Now, that does not mean that classified details were exposed. That's not the case.
Correct.
They just have to put this budget out there and say, this is what we want to spend in 2021. The cost for the National Intelligence Program for the fiscal year 2021 was set at $61.9 billion. That budget had to go under review. As a result, then, if I've got this exactly right, the Senate bill that was set forth as the budget, Senate Bill 3905, is called the Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2021. It was reviewed by a select committee on intelligence. That committee, in turn, submitted a report, Senate Report 116-233, and recommended that the bill as it was proposed, that the intelligence budget as it was proposed, pass. However, there were certain stipulations added to the bill, and one of those required that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, in consultation with the Secretary of Defense, submit an intelligence assessment of the threat posed by unidentified aerial phenomena and the progress that the Department of Defense Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force had made in understanding that threat. So there's a couple of acronyms here to just kind of take in. The UAPTF is the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force. And as Micah said, that's sort of the its predecessor was this ATIP program, and probably there were other predecessors associated, before that. But the UAPTF is tasked with understanding the threat posed by unidentified aerial phenomena.
Do you think that this would have been issued had not the Tic Tac videos been made public?
It's hard to say, but I think not. I mean, attention has not been drawn to most of these programs throughout the years, other than the public face of the reports that have been done. So Blue Book, the Condon Report, seems to me like there was a predecessor to Blue Book also, but it was a non-public facing report or non-public facing organization. Those
Project Sign and Project Grudge preceded Blue Book historically.
Yes, right. So Project Blue Book became sort of the face to the public. Its job was to, and they state that pretty clearly, its job was to explain everything. So when they stopped gathering reports formally, there have been other reports gathered by different agencies, different defense agencies, the Army, Navy, Air Force, whoever. But none of those were, at least to the public's eye, centralized into one kind of reporting structure. So when you hear about the Navy UFOs, the Tic Tac UFOs from a few years ago, and these other organizations, this one organization in particular, ATIP, which had existed in the middle of, what did you say, 2007 to 2012?
Yes.
Okay. So these things have existed, that program existed, then the individuals associated with that are kind of brought out into the open. And since the budget's coming up, somebody says, well, let's get some kind of formal report out that both informs the public and other interested agencies and individuals within the government and the military. So when the Senate bill, when the select subcommittee that was dealing with the intelligence report recommended that the bill pass, they also required some kind of reporting structure. And as a part of that reporting structure, this preliminary assessment had to be released in 2021, and it had to come out in June of 2021. So on June 25th, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released to the public this preliminary unclassified report titled Preliminary Assessment Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. It's for anyone who has downloaded it and actually read it, it's pretty clear. It's a pretty clear read. Lots of military acronyms, agencies associated with it.
They love acronyms.
Acronyms, yes. And it's only, including the cover page, it's only 9 pages long. So Mike and I will be talking about some of the sections from the report, kind of making some comments, regarding that. I do want to say this, though, and this is from page 2. Under the scope of the assessment, this is how the committee and the individuals that submitted the report, this is how they sort of scoped it out and said, this is what we cover, this is what we don't cover. Its purpose is threefold. Number one, it provides an overview. This assessment provides simply an overview for policymakers of the challenges associated with characterizing the potential threat posed by unidentified aerial phenomena. In other words, hey, look, you guys want to report on this? This is really challenging. Here are the challenges associated with characterizing any kind of potential threat, identifying what some of these UAP might be. That's the first thing. Second thing, this preliminary assessment also is intended to provide a way forward to develop a means to develop relevant processes, policies, technologies, and training for the U.S. military and other U.S. government personnel if and when they encounter UAP. This does not address anything that's submitted by somebody in the public. This is only a preliminary assessment.
Correct.
To develop means, processes, technologies, training for U.S. military personnel and government personnel. And it's designed to create a way for them to report something when people see or encounter a UAP. And the purpose then, the third purpose, is simply to enhance the intelligence community's ability to understand the threat. The director of the UAPTF, the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, is the accountable official for ensuring the timely collection and consolidation of the data on UAP. The data set described in this report, this preliminary assessment, is currently limited primarily, this is significant, to U.S. government reporting of incidents occurring from November 2004 to March 2021. The data continues to be collected and analyzed. So this is a very specific assessment. You're asking us to put together a preliminary assessment. We're not going to do assessment based on information provided by anyone outside the military or the government. The data set is going to be limited specifically to military and government information. And if done correctly, according to this assessment's intent, if done correctly, it will develop processes, training for military and government personnel with the purpose of helping the intelligence community assess the threat. And that's significant. That's why I don't think there's anything coming out in the future. This is intended, it's a preliminary report to the public about what the government is going to do and the military is going to do, but it's going to be based on what the military and the government processes involved can assess.
And that this says a lot, because this was not true with Project Blue Book.
Right.
Project
Exactly. This is very different.
Yeah, Project Blue Book received reports from civilians as well as people in the military. This is completely different. They're only going to study events, instances, circumstances in which government agencies or military people are involved in experiencing or witnessing UAPs. That's the data that they're going to study. That's how they're going to mine for it that way. And it's also interesting that they're going to provide a means to develop relevant processes and so forth for government personnel when they encounter, if and when they encounter. This actually provides nothing for the public as to what they should do if they encounter a UAP.
Correct. That is correct. This is very much an intelligence community assessment. They make some assessments here. They make some assumptions going forward in setting, out the parameters for the assessment. They assume that there are various forms of sensors that register UAP, and that these sensors generally operate correctly and capture enough real data to allow initial assessments. Now, this is from page 2 again. But some UAP may be attributable to sensor anomalies. Okay, that's kind of that's a safe assumption. Not
glitches in the radar, as they would
glitches
say,
in the radar or whatever, the audio, the video. So that's a safe bet. The limited amount, this is from page 3, the executive summary. The limited amount of high quality reporting on unidentified aerial phenomena hampers our ability to draw firm conclusions about the nature or intent of UAP. These people in government and military are saying, we don't have enough high quality reporting on unidentified aerial phenomena to draw any kind of firm conclusion about the nature or intent of UAP. So when some of the news agencies came out and said, well, they're not saying that there's aliens involved, but they're not saying there isn't, that is correct. That's exactly what's going on here.
Doesn't it seem, actually it is, it's bizarre that, number one, under this executive summary, it says, as a result, the UAPTF concentrated its review on reports that occurred between 2004 and 2021. It just seems so hard to swallow. In fact, it is hard to swallow that these are the only years that they're collecting reports, or that they did collect reports. There was nothing prior to 2004 with which they would have looked for reports, government agencies, even civilian agencies, from which they would have gathered reports. That's just mind-boggling to me, that they would just limit it from 2004 to 2021, as if military and government agencies stopped looking into the UFO phenomena after Project Blue Book was closed. If you go to the Black Vault website, hosted by John Greenwald Jr., this website has probably over 1 million pages worth of documents released from government agencies, all of the armed forces, concerning the subject of UFOs that have been released through the Freedom of Information Act. To say that government agencies were not collecting reports and analyzing data after Project Blue Book closed is just crazy. So for this study to just say, "Hey, we just looked at it from 2004 to 2021," my question is why? Why in the world would you do that?
Right. And I've kind of wondered about that. I think, perhaps this has something to do with some of the accuracy of military sensing devices. In page 4, they talk about UAP collection challenges, which is kind of like a different subject. But they do, because it can be a mechanical, scientific challenge, it can also be a social, political challenge. But one of the technical challenges they talk about is that sensors, if they're gathering data, if they're using data from a particular period, say 2004 to 2021, if they're using data from that period, it's might have something to do with the level of integrity of the sensing devices available during that time. And they talk about some of those devices just briefly here on page 4, where they talk about that there are certain types of optical sensors that can provide insight into relative size, shape, structure of something that's identified or unidentified. Radio frequency sensors, where we're talking about radar and other things, are intended to provide accurate velocity and range information. In other words, sensing devices developed by science and the military are designed for specific purposes. So some of the things reported in a UAP report by the military may have data that's available on a certain type of sensor or sensors, but not on others, because those were not in play at the time. So you kind of have to wonder, is this then referring to data that's can be gathered during those times because the sensing devices were deemed as relatively accurate? And there are tons of reports, and there are other reporters and writers who have dealt with reports that have made it into the public and not made it into the public for reading. Some of those possibly were also recorded by the military. Some of them would not have been. Under the executive summary, again, there on page 3, it says most of the UAP reported probably do represent physical objects, given that a majority of UAP were registered across multiple sensors, including radar, infrared, electro-optical, weapon seekers, and visual observation. However, in a limited number of instances, UAP reportedly appeared to exhibit unusual flight characteristics. Now, I have a little trouble believing that one, but then it goes on to say these observations could be the result of sensor errors, spoofing, or observer misperception and require rigorous analysis. One of the things they allude to in this report is that it's possible that some UAP reports register these unusual, speed and altitude changes, things like this, characteristics, but that those reports are not actually what the object being observed is doing, but that those objects are able to generate spoofing, which is, hey, it looks like I'm here, but I'm really over there. It looks like I'm going this fast, but I'm really going this fast. So,
Really?
yeah.
So you think it's not an error on the part of the observer's equipment, but something that the object is able to generate itself?
Yeah, there's some allusion to that in here also.
Oh, that's interesting. I did notice that the explanatory categories. I think you may have mentioned this, but I don't think they're really all that different from those categories of Project Blue Book: airborne clutter, natural atmospheric phenomena, United States government or U.S. industry development programs, foreign adversary systems, and a catch-all other bin. I would have to go back and look at Blue Book and the Condon report to see what categories they came up with, but it sounds pretty standard to me.
Right, I agree. And it's interesting that they say if and when. There is this attitude within the context of this preliminary assessment that confirms that, yeah, we may not be able to identify everything here. If we can identify it, it's probably going to fit into one of these categories. They do acknowledge that UAP clearly pose a safety of flight issue, and they may pose a challenge to U.S. national security. Safety concerns primarily center on aviators contending with an increasingly cluttered air domain. That is certainly true. But a UAP would also represent a national security challenge if they truly represent foreign adversary collection platforms or provide evidence that a potential adversary has developed either a breakthrough or disruptive technology. So there's an acknowledgement here that anything that just because it's unidentified does not mean it's extraterrestrial.
Just looking at the executive summary, this one page, which is page 2 of the or page 3 of the report, I'm not really buying this. Are you? And what I mean by that is the first mark, the first statement that's in bold, the limited amount of high quality reporting on UAPs hampers our ability to draw firm conclusions about the nature or intent. When they talk about high quality reporting, the tools and the equipment, and even the observers, the users of this equipment, the limited amount of high quality reporting.
Yeah, I'm not buying that.
I don't buy this at all. I have to say, if Google Earth can show us, uh, the license plate on somebody's car, it seems, it just seems so unbelievable that the military services of the United States government don't actually have really good, high quality reports where they are in fact able to determine exactly what's going on. That just this just seems like fiction to me.
I think, to be honest, I think what happens here is you have this in a post 911 world where the need to more quickly assess threats to the general public as well as threats to U.S. airspace. There were some very real needs in terms of being able to assess intelligence much more quickly, gather the information, first of all, using electronic surveillance or other processes, gather and then assess that information quickly. That was kind of obvious. But it was also put out there to the public, hey, if we're going to do a better job at this, we need more money, more resources, and those things have come as a result. I think the same thing is being presented here. Here you have a group that's saying, you have the public saying, we want to know what these guys flying around the aircraft saw. Was it ET or was it something else? And so you have, referring to the Tic Tac video from a few years ago. And so you have the pressure that's presented to just general lawmakers and people who are involved in making policy to have some kind of an answer. And there's pressure then on the intelligence community and the military. And so we don't know what some of this stuff is. We need more money.
I
And,
think the
and we're
go
going to
ahead.
develop resources. I honestly believe they're going to develop resources. We've already got some scary stuff out there. I think they're
Yeah.
going to use this as a way to leverage other resources too. Now, this is the intelligence community, so which is not just concerned with something flying around overhead.
Right.
They're concerned with threats on the ground, threats within internal government, threats within just the general population, and those are very real threats. So I'm not knocking that in any way. I'm just simply saying that when you say, like you said here, the limited amount of high quality reporting, really? You mean that guy flying that jet off the Navy carrier was it wasn't able to make some high quality observation? Of course they make high quality observations.
Right.
They
Yeah.
really do. But that doesn't mean, of course, that all that information can be consolidated, correctly interpreted. So the goal here, again, and they made this very clear, the goal of this assessment is to provide policymakers, in other words, lawmakers and people who write budgets, with a means of understanding what's going on, and then bringing all that information, developing some processes, which involves money, and then consolidating that information for the intelligence community, not the general
Yeah,
public.
right. It would seem to me that this report and the request for this report is ultimately the result of pressure put on the government, maybe put on the Pentagon, the Navy, because videos like the Tic Tac videos were released. The ATIP program was disclosed to have existed 5 years prior to its disclosure in 2017. So, this social pressure or this pressure being put on the government is essentially pressure on them to restate in perhaps a new and fresh way the conclusions of the Condon report. And that is, we just don't know what this is. We
Right.
don't have enough equipment. We're not finding it to be a national security threat. We need more money to study it, which is in itself interesting. It seems that they're wanting now to go back into the study of this subject, but only because it's never truly gone away.
Right.
And the disclosure of the ATIP program and the release of the Tic Tac videos and Luis Elizondo and people associated with sightings are speaking out. So now there's pressure on them to restate the old conclusions of Project Blue Book, gather up more money from the public to begin a new study, which in the end isn't going to take us any further down the road.
No, because
At least it won't take the public further down the road.
right. And that's not the intent here. At the end of the executive summary, the writers say consistent consolidation of reports from across the federal government, standardized reporting, increased collection and analysis, and a streamlined process for screening all such reports against a broad range of relevant U.S. government data will allow for a more sophisticated analysis of UAP that is likely to deepen our understanding. Some of these steps are resource intensive and would require additional investment. This is a sales pitch. So, and listen, I'm not knocking that. I'm not saying that that's not true, because let's just be honest. I think that truthfully, if what people observe is, let's say, foreign adversary technology of some type, I do want the government to know what's going on. I do want the military to be able to assess the threat and protect the nation. You want that. Same thing with, anything with the general population.
Right.
So that's not the issue here. I think what we need to understand is, though, this is probably not going to tell the average person anything more than what they already know. On page 4, the report says the preliminary assessment says that the available reporting is largely inconclusive, that limited data leaves most UAP unexplained. They do acknowledge that this was interesting actually, no standardized reporting mechanism existed until the Navy established one in March of 2019. The Air Force subsequently adopted that mechanism in November of 2020, but it remains limited to U.S. government reporting, USG reporting. The UAP task force regularly heard anecdotally during its research about other observations that occurred, but which were never captured in formal or informal reporting by those observers. In other words, by military or government observers.
Right.
After carefully considering this information, the UAP task force focused on reports that involved UAP that were largely witnessed. This is interesting, and key to understanding this. They were largely witnessed firsthand by military aviators, and that were collected from systems we considered to be reliable. Okay. These reports describe incidents that occurred between 2004 and 2021, with the majority coming in the last 2 years as the new reporting mechanism became better known to the military aviation community. We were able to identify one of the incidents that they studied in this before releasing this report. We were able to identify one reported UAP with high confidence. In that case, we identified the object as a large deflating balloon, but the others remain unexplained. They say 144 reports originated from U.S. government sources. Of these, 80 reports involved observation with multiple sensors. And these still remain unidentified. Most
Yeah.
reports describe UAP as objects that interrupted pre-planned training or other military activity. One of the things that they talk about in here is that there seems to be a high interest where UAP are involved. There seems to be a high interest in like observing our military, which of course leads you to think that this is foreign adversary technology, and that they're studying our military, studying our movements, what we do with troops, aircraft, ships, subs, things like that. There are UAP collection challenges. This is culturally true, that there are socio-cultural stigmas and sensor limitations that remain obstacles to collecting data. Okay, that's true. Although some technical challenges, for example, how to appropriately filter out radar clutter to ensure safety of flight for military and civilian aircraft, and I'm reading directly from the report,
Right.
are long-standing in the aviation community, but others are unique to the UAP problem set. For example, and I give this, narratives from aviators in the operational community and analysts from the military describe a certain amount of disparagement that is associated with observing a UAP or a UFO. In other words, yeah, you were flying up there, you saw a UFO. Say, did your physical check out before you got into that jet? You know, there's this kind of thing that goes on, reporting it or attempting even to discuss it with colleagues. Although the effects of these stigmas have lessened as senior members of the scientific, policy, military, and intelligence communities engage on the topic seriously in public, there is still a reputational risk that may keep many observers silent, complicating scientific pursuit of the topic. In other words, if we create a system for reporting, there are people who are not going to want to report because it makes you look stupid or something to that effect, you know.
The people would have to be encouraged to report.
Yeah, right, exactly. But
and know
they're
that
only
there's and know that there's not going to be any blowback towards your career, your vocation for doing that.
correct. But the people that they want to report are not the general public.
Right.
The people they want to report are military, government,
Right.
and aviation personnel. One other challenge they acknowledge is that sensors mounted on military platforms are typically designed to fulfill specific missions. Therefore, they cannot always correctly interpret the data that is presented to them. Okay.
I find it hard to believe. I want to back up to the technology issue. I find it hard to believe that the armed services don't have equipment that allows them to determine what these UAPs are. I personally find that really hard to believe unless the nature of the phenomena is so bizarre
Mm-hmm.
that it can't be determined through physical observation and what's the word I'm looking for? Scientific processes, material scientific processes. We can't determine what it is using the technology that we have. It would seem to me that it doesn't matter whether it's our government, private industry, foreign governments, our armed services, our U.S. government should be able to determine what everybody else is doing, at least whether there's an object that's really there, whether it appears to be man-made, whether it's demonstrating known principles of flight, or if it's not.
Right.
Unless this phenomena is so different, then they can't determine what it is.
Yeah.
In which case, the other bin, the category titled other is the category for the unexplained, the truly bizarre and unexplained, which I think is consistent with UFOs in general, that aside from things that naturally occur in our material world and aside from man-made objects flying around or debris left over. We do have this other that is real and genuine, but is one that is very difficult to determine using only, for lack of a better way to put it, scientific means.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that could be a rather startling admission on their part,
Right.
in one sense that if we can't determine what this is, we need more money to study it. That really only makes sense if either the equipment they have is so inadequate, which I really don't believe, or the phenomena itself in part is so bizarre that they can't determine what it is.
I think that
And so they're leaving this open to the reader to speculate. But
right. It's interesting because they say that there is a handful of UAP that appear to demonstrate advanced technology, which is really what this I think what this assessment is pushing toward. We want to understand if there is an advanced threat or a representation of some type of advanced technology. From page 5, in 18 incidents described in 21 reports, observers reported unusual UAP movement patterns or flight characteristics. Some UAP appeared to remain stationary in winds aloft. In other words, the wind is blowing, but this thing isn't moving. Or they moved against the wind, or they maneuvered abruptly, or moved at considerable speed without discernible means of propulsion. In a small number of cases, military aircraft systems processed radio frequency energy associated with UAP sightings. The UAP task force holds a small, this is interesting, they hold a small amount of data that appear to show UAP demonstrating acceleration or a degree of signature management. In other words, not just acceleration, but how radar perceived that acceleration.
Right.
Signature management. Additional rigorous analysis are necessary to multiple teams or groups of technical experts to determine the nature and validity of this data. We're conducting further analysis to determine if breakthrough technologies were demonstrated. The general consensus on the report is that the UAP that they studied for this, and they studied primarily military reports, lacked a single explanation. And that, and again, that if the analysis of the data supports the construct, this is their construct, that if and when an individual UAP incident is resolved, it's going to fall into one of 5 categories, which you've already mentioned. It's either going to be airborne clutter, natural atmospheric phenomena, U.S. government or industry developmental programs, foreign adversary systems, those 4 in primary, or a catch-all other bin, with the exception, they say, with the exception of the one instance where we determined with high confidence that the reported UAP was airborne clutter, in other words, this deflating balloon.
Right.
We currently lack sufficient information in our data set to attribute incidents to specific explanations. 144 reports studied, one conclusion.
Interesting. Yeah. And I guess I'm, in a sense, giving this a hard time, which it doesn't completely deserve, but it is worthy of note that they did say some UAP appeared to remain stationary in winds aloft, move against the wind, maneuver at a considerable speed without discernible means of propulsion. And as you said, military aircraft systems processed radio frequency energy associated with UAP sightings. That's worthy of note. That
it is. It also says
they admitted that.
Right. They also conclude. They said the UAP task force did have 11 reports of documented instances in which pilots reported near misses with a UAP. So there is airborne and air flight concern here. So it's not just, well, it is just all of this. It's actually, is this adversarial technology? Is this airborne clutter something that somebody put up there. Somebody's flying a drone that they made in their garage. I don't know. You
Right.
can be really hypothetical about a lot of things, but they have to be concerned about those things.
But maybe this is just my inner conspiracy theorist coming out, but it also seems like it just seems to me that they know what these are.
Hmm.
Here's what I want to say. I'm being a conspiracy theorist. I just want to say I think they know what these are, but they don't want to admit to the public that they know what they are. And so it's easier to say we don't have the right tools, the right equipment, the right training to observe them accurately and to conclude what they are. Here are some of the things that we've noticed. Give us more money and we'll eventually be able to figure this out. Because it would also seem to me that there's a sense in which, this pressure that we talked about earlier is being exerted upon them for reasons we discussed, the ATIP program, Tic Tac videos, and the fact that people have been continuing to see UFOs, UAPs since Blue Book closed. And with the coming of the digital age, this information that the public is able to collect is better. Even the degree with which, even though people can hoax sightings,
Mm-hmm.
through films, pictures, and so forth, there's still enough good sightings with people recording, I think, accurately what it is they're perceiving, viewing, that they feel a need to give an answer to that. But it would just seem to me that they know what this is and they don't want to come right out and say it. So this is different, certainly, than Project Blue Book in many respects, in many important respects. On page 5 at the bottom, UAP probably lack a single explanation, as you said, but they conclude that, well, this could be some UAP observations could be attributed to developments and classified programs by U.S. entities.
Mm-hmm.
So this means that the people who put this report together don't have access to contracts that private industry has with branches of the government, the military, and are developing aircraft that is that demonstrates, what would we call it, aerial maneuvers and so forth, that is so non-traditional that I'm getting lost in what I'm trying to say here. But even they can't determine what it is. It's
Right.
so super secret, right? It's
Right.
so super secret. Or it could be technologies deployed by China, Russia, another nation, or a non-governmental entity. Well,
Tom
who's
Swift is back.
that?
Yeah, Tom
I
Swift.
mean, that's not the Taliban, right? I
No,
mean,
right.
that's
Here is where this report,
oh,
I think, when it wraps up, it's looking at future direction here. Page 6 and 7 talks about explaining UAP will require analytic, collection, and resource investment. And their goal is this: to standardize reporting, consolidate the data, deepen the analysis. So, and then they go on to state that the UAP task force has already begun to develop interagency analytical and processing workflows to ensure both collection and analysis will be well informed and coordinated. That seems like common sense. Good idea. And they acknowledge that the majority of UAP data right now is from the U.S. Navy reporting, but efforts are underway to standardize incident reporting across U.S. military services and other agencies to ensure that all the relevant data is captured with respect to particular incidents and any U.S. activities that might be relevant. Okay. So, in other words, they're going to standardize a reporting system that not only helps the military do the reporting, but also identifies any U.S. activities that might be involved with this. So, and then they go on to talk about they're currently working to acquire additional reporting, including from the Air Force, and they've begun receiving data from the FAA. And they need this because USA Air Force data collection has been limited historically, although that has been limited historically. They acknowledge that in November of 2020, the Air Force began a 6-month pilot program to collect in areas where the Air Force is most likely to encounter UAP. And that because there is a collection bias here, and they acknowledge that most of the reports they dealt with took place in areas where the U.S. military or some other governmental agency was active. So around aircraft carriers, bases, nuclear missile sites, things like
But
that.
if in the future all that they do is collect information from government agencies, from government observers, that's still a collection bias.
Mhm. Right. And that's where there's a section here where they talk about expanding collection. Since the data has been limited historically to the Air Force, they've launched this pilot program and they've begun involving the FAA. And here's why. The FAA routinely captures data related to UAP just during the normal course of managing air traffic operations.
Mm-hmm.
They ingest that data when pilots and other airspace users report unusual or unexpected events to the air traffic organization. However, in addition to this, the FAA also, this is interesting, they continually monitor their systems for anomalies, generating additional information that may be of use to the task force. So, since the FAA is able to isolate data of interest that could be of use to the UAPT, they want the FAA to make that available because they have a robust, as it says here, a robust and effective outreach program. In other words, the FAA reaches out beyond their own air people. If an air traffic controller sees something on radar and a pilot sees it in the air, they do talk to people who may have seen it from the ground. So the FAA has an outreach among the members of its community and also to the general public, although they're more concerned about the data that can be measured by sensing devices and by observation of trained personnel. They're more sensitive to that. So at the end of this whole preliminary assessment, they talk about expanding collection. The UAP task force is currently looking for novel ways. That's a scary way. That's scary. Novel ways to increase collection of UAP cluster areas when U.S. forces are not present, as a way to baseline standard UAP activity and mitigate the collection bias in their own data set. In other words, they're acknowledging that they need to expand their collection of information from other sources because they want to get away from collection bias. Collection bias is if it's observed by the military in a military encounter, you have this data that's present, but what if it's observed by someone else who is non-military? And what if this happens out in some other area where there's no military presence available? How do they collect that kind of data? And I think at that point they are talking about collecting data from the general public.
It would just seem to me that this whole report was put together by people that are not in the know, that this whole thing was put together by people that don't have access to the information that already exists, to the reporting and to the technology that already exists. I can certainly understand them wanting to get data from the FAA, but there's no mention of getting data from NORAD. Wouldn't it stand to reason that NORAD would see it all?
Well, that would be classified.
Yeah, but they got the stuff, right? I mean, that's what I'm saying. This whole report is being put together by people that are like, well, we can't go to get it from the people that we know that have it, so we'll have to go get it from the people that we can get it from.
Or I think that's partially correct. I think it's also true that, let's remember, this assessment was generated by the the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. So there's no way that a sensible person is going to put classified information out there for the public to review. They're going to deal with the unclassified things that they could talk about. And as I said, and I've said before, I do believe that this is a way to generate. It's a way to say to the public, yeah, we don't know exactly what this is. So we need to put more resources, investments, technology, science money into assessing the situation, because we did 144 reports and we only know what one of them was. It was a weather balloon that was falling out of the sky. So, or a balloon, a deflating balloon. It doesn't say weather balloon. But if this is the case, I agree with you. I think it's not likely that they don't know exactly what's going on here. But
So really, what they're doing is they've issued a preliminary report as people that are not in the know to gather information from government agencies in a standardized way to increase their ability to sense and detect what's out there for the purpose of releasing information to the public.
no, I don't
You don't
think the
think so?
information will go out to the public. No, the
But
public
this report did.
This report did, but this is an unclassified report. But it states very clearly that the purpose of releasing the preliminary assessment was to generate, to acknowledge the situation and say that we need to allocate resources and develop strategies and processes to provide more information for the intelligence community.
Yeah,
Because
I'm still wrestling with this notion that there are groups within the government that know exactly what it is they're observing, even if they can't determine exactly how it works and all of that, that they have a great database of information that they have analyzed and dissected over the decades, and that this is really just a public relations. That what we're reading here is really just a
another
public,
public relation
effort,
like Blue
which
Book.
which does in a way admit more than what the Condon report did with the information that Blue Book collected. They are admitting some things, some possibilities, but they're not going to they're not going to comb. This is interesting. The director of national intelligence, who is over all this evidently, is not going to comb or maybe be able to get his hands on the information that he really needs, or he can get his hands on that information, but he's not going to come out and talk about it in this report. He's going to talk about other means of collecting information. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
I suppose we are dealing with what we know and what we don't know and what we suspect in the bigger picture of things. It always seems reasonable to me to believe that, if you've ever watched any of the Disclosure Project testimonies, there's a gentleman who worked with the FAA, and I can't remember his name, but he talks about an instance where a air control tower recorded images on radar doing things that aircraft can't do, and someone from Central Intelligence came in, the CIA came in, viewed the tape, took the tape and copies of it, and said, basically, I was never here, and you're never going to talk about this. So there are agencies within the government that get this information,
Mm-hmm.
but they keep it from other agencies in the government. So it seems to me that the director of national intelligence has issued this report as a way to pay lip service to the subject in respect to the public's knowledge of it, and say, hey, we're working on it.
Well, yes.
But we're not going to tell you what we've done over the last 50 years with
Right.
the information that we do have.
That we do have. That's right.
We're
That's
just going
right.
to give you. It's interesting, but it doesn't take us any further down the road, I think.
No, I agree. I don't think this does take us any further down the road. It does let's think about it like this. And from my point of view, I guess the result of the UFO craze of the 50s led to a public-facing program called Blue Book. When faced with public interest because of the Tic Tac videos, there's an acknowledgement, yes, that this ATIP program did exist. Now we have the UAP task force. That's easier for me to say than UAPTF. UAP task force. And they're going to be the agency responsible for coordinating this data for the national intelligence community. what they lay out here is, yeah, we need more money and more processes. We need a standardized reporting standardized reporting system. When they talk about consolidating the data to deepen the analysis, they're not only asking for, I don't think that this report is asking for additional money in every respect. I think what they're asking for is, look, if we're going to actually, whether or not this is true is another thing, but if we're going to actually study this phenomena and correctly assess and identify what these UAP actually are, then we need access to other, not just a standardized reporting tool, but we need access to other information that maybe is pigeonholed for one reason or another by some aspect of the military or the intelligence community. We hear all the time about interagency rivalry in the intelligence community, and after 9/11, although there were other, which led to military involvement overseas and led to developing technologies and programs to more correctly consolidate and understand data available about threats within the United States, the organization that came out of that, Homeland Security.
Yeah.
So there is, I think, this aspect of, okay, we need some kind of program to report to the public and assure people, but we also need access to what everybody else is talking about. I don't just want what's on my plate. I need what's on the other person's plate too. So there is a kind of an access, or they're trying to open doors, I think, here to access information just within our own government. Yeah, point.
So you think that it could be a legitimate effort to get more information from agencies that they haven't been collecting in a formal way?
Right.
Perhaps they've been collecting it informally. And when, for example, aircraft carriers and pilots experience UFOs, that data is collected and sent somewhere. But now the director of national intelligence is saying, we're gonna, I don't know, open up the floodgates. Well, that's not a good metaphor, but we're going to acknowledge that we need to be doing this. So we're just going to go ahead and give everybody a standardized form to fill out and acknowledge that we're going to go ahead and start doing this on a regular basis.
On a regular basis.
As where before you were just going to send the video with a courier to the Pentagon and you were never going to hear about it from again. Now you're going to submit everything on a form, and you're still never going to hear about it again.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, exactly.
But at least you know that we're making an effort to collect information.
Right. It's interesting if you read.
And we're never going to tell the public what it is
Right.
we really know and have known for decades. But because of these ATEP videos, we've got to play our hand a little bit differently here than we have in the past.
Right.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. My favorite author on some of this stuff is not actually a UFO writer dealing with anything like. My favorite writer on some of these subjects is Annie Jacobson. When she writes, I'm reading Paperclip right now, Operation Paperclip.
Okay.
If you read Operation Paperclip, and if you've read her book Area 51, in Area 51 she talks about the development of the U-2 technology and how the U-2 was not specifically. It was developed as a spy plane, of course, high flight, high altitude. Although they knew that it had limitations, it was being developed by, oh, good grief, I can't think of the aircraft builder now. But they were building.
Was that Lockheed Martin?
It might have been. Yeah, I think it might have been Lockheed Martin. It was interesting. They were building contracts for two groups, the Air Force and the CIA. And when there were some issues with getting a flyover in Cuba during the Bay of Pigs, prior to the Bay of Pigs, the Air Force, there was this whole debate about, well, who's actually going to do this? And I think it was actually the CIA that did the overflight, but it was because it had to do with the availability of the planes, and the CIA wanted to do it, the Air Force wanted to do it. So there was a rivalry there, in a sense, not directly associated with the whole problem of developing a spy plane, but who gets the money, who gets the resources, who gets access to the technology, the plane itself. In Paperclip, in Operation Paperclip, she talks about how the certain branches of the military wanted Nazi scientists to come to the United States because they wanted to take advantage of what these guys had learned and the technology and weapons that they had developed
Right.
to end the war. Not they talk about ending the war with Japan, but then there were some who were looking ahead to potential problems with Russia in the future, which that did develop. And so they're like, we got to get these guys in the United States. But the State Department was like, these guys are Nazis. We're not bringing Nazis to the United States. There were some people who had a legitimate moral obligation
Yeah.
because of some of the things that these people were in
Right.
developing, some of the experiments that they did on prisoners of war to develop the technologies that they developed. And some of that was gas technology, and some of it was high flight, high speed technology. So there were people that wanted the scientists, wanted the research, wanted the disassembled missiles and things brought over to the U.S. And all of that happened. But then there were some legitimate voices within the government saying, "No, wait a minute. We know that these guys have we suspect that these guys have done these things and developed these programs by doing some really awful things to human
Yeah.
subjects. And these guys need to be put on trial." And so there were some within the military community who were just like, well, let's just get them over here and not tell the State Department.
Yeah.
So when we talk about rivalry, people really do not always cooperate the way that they should because they're human. And
Right.
although we're talking about technological systems that might help us identify what a UAP truly is, that information and the development of that process or technology always goes back to a human source or sources. And sometimes who gets the credit plays a problem, who gets the information plays a problem, who gets the money to develop the technology. So yeah, things get pigeonholed, things get tucked away. And in the process of solving the UAP, because nobody wants to say UFO anymore, beam me
I
up,
do.
Scotty. Yeah, beam me up, Scotty. There's no intelligent life on this planet. Nobody wants to say that anymore. So in identifying what the UAP is, the unidentified aerial phenomena, identifying what it is at any given time, if that will ease the public's mind, then these are the things that we need to do that. But in the process, let's also deepen the information that's made available to the intelligence community. And they're talking about doing that through just not only military sources and military technologies, but through doing it in interagency cooperation. They have to deepen that, and they have to deepen access to information that isn't available through military sources.
So you think that the near future holds the potential for government agencies to share information on this subject,
Yes.
as where before it was don't ask, don't tell sort of thing,
I think that they're opening the door for people to report
or don't
in
tell,
with
don't lose your job.
yeah, right. I think they've opened the door for people to report in the military, report in government branches. They're saying, yeah, let's talk about this. But uh, I don't think that they're necessarily opening the door to let information back out to the general public. I don't think that at all. Because some of it is our own technology, some of it is foreign adversaries, some of it is something else. And there will be those who will say it's ET. We don't never say, never, ever, ever say, we don't have anything that flies that fast. Oh, for goodness sake. We're really good as a government and as a nation, as are other governments and nations, at developing technology and keeping it out of the general public's eye for 20 years.
Yeah.
You know, so never say we don't have. I would never be in a position, and I don't know actually anybody that is personally, but then I don't associate with a lot of people who are in the government or the military, but I don't know anybody who's qualified to say, as a nation, we don't have that.
Well, certainly the director of national intelligence wouldn't know. I mean, when
Should
you think
know.
about it, when it says USG or industrial development programs, some UAP observations could be attributed to developments in classified programs by U.S. entities. My
Right.
first my first thought is, Don't you already know that? I mean,
And he's
if
acknowledging that probably,
yeah,
yeah.
if you are observing objects through your equipment, through your technology that don't exhibit traditional flight characteristics or have a known source of propulsion, if this is what you're observing and you suspect that it could be a development, it could be something that's being developed by the United States government or by the entities that it contracts with, you're just admitting that you don't know. And
Yeah.
you're the director of national
Yeah.
intelligence, you know?
Or that
But
you
but
do
but but
know.
somebody knows.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
or somebody knows, or you do know, but this is some type of, public relations effort to give the impression that you're getting government agencies now to fill out a standardized form, share knowledge, instead of doing it the old fashioned way where someone from a three-letter government agency shows up and says, "Give us your tape, give us your backup. We were never here."
Yeah.
You're just not
Yeah.
doing that anymore.
Right.
There's a sense in which this is really rather humorous, and
I
it could
think
be
that,
technologies deployed by China and Russia and another nation. Or I love this, a non-governmental entity. Well, what is that? Is that a contractor that is working for the United States government, or is it something else?
yeah, a terrorist group, or, think back to the,
Well,
the TV shows from the 60s, The Man from Uncle was all about interagency cooperation, defeat an international crime group called Thrush,
and what show is that?
The Man from Uncle.
Oh, okay. Because I
Yeah.
was thinking of Get Smart.
Yeah.
What were the two agencies there? Chaos and Control. It's just so black and white.
Yeah.
Don't you miss the Cold War?
Yeah. Yeah.
It was all just black and white back then. Chaos
Uh,
and Control.
we all thought what was it Siegfried used to say, we are the chaos. We don't shush here. Because he'd shoot somebody and Smart would say, that seems a bit extreme, Siegfried. Couldn't you have just shushed him? We are chaos. We don't shush here.
I bet there's like one giant cone of silence that comes down over a select group of people, and they talk about what they really know, and they know everything. And it's everybody else outside the cone of silence that doesn't know what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my word.
So, the long and the short of it is, I think this just lays the groundwork for more funding for various programs and technologies. It does not necessarily, and it lays the groundwork for developing, accessing information across a wide variety of military sources and government sources, but also indirectly public sources, probably.
Yeah.
But it does not in any way really
Take us further.
Yeah, it
We, we,
doesn't.
we, we, we can rightfully anticipate in the future there will be more videos. There will be more witnesses coming out. All of that sort of thing. And we might get some more, I don't know, better, well-defined statements stating, here's what we've seen, but we don't know what it is. And 25 years from now, we're not going to be any further down the road than we are now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for someone who is listening, let's just maybe
But for those of you that aren't listening,
yes,
just don't worry about it because
don't
you're
worry
not
about it.
listening.
Don't worry about it because you're not there. But if you're listening, maybe
This is like the end of the world broadcast. If there's anyone out there listening, Jay and Mike have uncovered all the secrets of the UFOs. Here they are. You can tell that this has been an interesting report and an interesting discussion, but I've caused you to rather be lost in all of this. Like, what are we talking about?
I think that to me, honestly, and this is the reason why sometimes I talk about this stuff or even write about this stuff. The reason I do it is because I if I believe that somebody is telling me the truth about something that they've seen or experienced, that is actually the most valuable piece of evidence. It is
Right.
not.
Eyewitness testimony. Sure.
Yes, it is not whether or not it can be always corroborated by physical evidence
Yeah.
or scientific evidence. Now, I realize that there is a percentage of people who just make stuff up, but I also acknowledge that there is a significant percentage of people who are honestly stumped or mystified or scared
Right.
because of something. So, and for the most part, they are accurately telling you what they experienced and what they saw. So, for anyone who is listening, if that's you, if you're telling the truth about something that you've experienced and heard or seen, then in my opinion, you're the best evidence. I would never say that I know, probably never say that I know what happened or what you experienced, but I wouldn't have a problem saying that you're not crazy. I wouldn't have a problem saying probably that you're telling the truth.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have a problem saying, "Hey, right there with you. Don't exactly know what it is that you've experienced, but you're not crazy. You don't need to see a shrink. We don't use that word anymore. You don't need to see a
Yeah.
counselor, psychologist. You might need to see somebody because of the stress associated, but you're not delusional." And there were
Unless you are that small part of the population that actually is crazy and delusional.
yes, yeah. I'm saying, provided you're telling
We
the
might
truth.
be afraid to tell you that.
Yeah. So, and the reason that I can say that is because I've had
Yeah.
one instance in particular that really just stunned me. And because of that, and because I knew other people had seen it too, made me stop and think, okay, I saw this, everybody saw this. None of us knows what it is, but we saw it.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Well,
I do not need the government to tell me what it was, honestly. I
right.
don't.
In another week or so, I'm going to teach on. I have a um, a unit in my introduction to apologetics outline that deals with basically the spirit realm and the supernatural and the role that personal eyewitness testimony plays in establishing that there is a spirit realm and there are spirit beings and there are supernatural miraculous acts and so forth, and that personal eyewitness testimony is the basis in part for establishing these things, and that takes into consideration people that lie
Right.
and misobserve, misinterpret, or are generally suffering from psychosis. But in the future, we'll have to do I suppose it would be personal UFO experiences part 4. And I'll see if I can get two of my friends on one who had I believe it was a flying disc encounter when he was a teenager delivering newspapers, and another who was in the United States Army and was guarding a weapons depot, I believe, up in one of the northeastern states, and had lights come out of the sky and hover around, shine lights down over storage units. I believe it was something to that effect. He's told me the story a couple of times years ago. It's a very brief encounter, but still nonetheless interesting. I would look to those stories as evidence that something did happen.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
that's obviously the problem that material scientists have with this conclusion, and that is that their testimony is evidence that what they saw was really real and more than likely genuine.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. We've been taught indirectly and sometimes directly to believe that if you cannot establish fact with evidence, then
physical evidence.
physical evidence, then in fact, it is not fact.
Right.
And that is simply not the case.
All right. Well, good discussion. I think we're going to come back in the near future. Our next episode should deal with Richard Dolan's UFOs and the National Security State Volume 1, right?
Mm-hmm. That's the
Yeah.
plan. I have to
Sounds good.
find my books again, but yeah, that's the plan.
Sounds good.
All right.
All right. Well, that's all for this episode of Posterity Podcast. Take care, everybody. Maybe just say goodbye.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah. Goodbye, everybody.
Step up. Plant your feet firmly.